Affairs don't begin in the bedroom, they begin in childhood. In the part of you that decided she needed to bury her truth just to be loved. The part that's now screaming to be seen. I'm Alex Croxford, and this is the Deeper Love Podcast, where we name the shame, face the guilt, and help you find your way back to yourself. So let's begin. I wanted to record an episode to really help any of you who are right in the middle of the devastation after the reveal of your betrayal. Because I know how absolutely horrific, how lonely, how devastating that moment is in a woman's life, in a man's life, in anyone's life, of having to reveal something or being discovered in something which is terribly traumatic for both parties and feels like your entire world has just gone up in flames. And I remember so clearly having decided that I was going to tell my ex-husband. I remember where I was. I remember I was doing yoga on the yoga mat in the beautiful new extension we'd done on the house. And it was the summer solstice of 2020. So we're in the middle of freaking COVID. And I just knew I couldn't keep the secret anymore. It was honestly choking me to death. And I felt like I was staring down the barrel at a life of having to live a lie, and a life of having to live a lie in a marriage that was increasingly becoming more and more disconnected, in a job that wasn't lighting me up anymore. And we'd had a failed round of IVF, and it looked like this was going to be my life without children for the rest of my life. And I just knew that I could not live this lie for the rest of my life. There was just no way. And it was absolutely fucking terrifying. Like, terrifying. I had no idea what was going to happen afterwards. I had no idea what was going to happen with our marriage. I had no idea what was going to happen with my friendships, with my house, with my family, with his family. And I just remember it getting to a point where I just couldn't hold it in any longer. And I remember he came downstairs and he was standing in the kitchen, and I was already crying, and it was very unlikely for me to be crying. I was just not someone that cried. So he instantly knew there was something up. And he said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I was really, really sobbing. And I can't remember the exact words I said, but it was something along the lines of, "I've kissed someone else," or "I've cheated on you," or "I've had an affair." I don't think I said I had an affair, but I definitely said I've betrayed you, or I've cheated on you, I've kissed someone else. And he was obviously so shocked, like couldn't even understand me. Like, what? And, I want to keep his privacy, so I'm not going to give too many details, but what ensued was, through my lens, one of the most traumatizing things to see, which was the pain that my actions had caused someone that I loved so dearly, and the absolute fear of what that meant in my life, in his life, in our future. And I remember that evening we were meant to be going to a friend's barbecue, because I think it was when they'd started to open up so we could have events outside or something. I can't remember. But we were meant to be going to a friend's barbecue, and of course there was no way of telling any of our friends that the truth of what had happened, because we were still trying to process it ourselves. So we had to tell a white lie and just said we'd had a massive argument, which, to be honest, wasn't that much of a mistruth. But all of our friends knew that that was very unlike us. So I remember getting messages saying, "Is everything okay?" And I remember thinking, my God, it's so far from okay, but I'm just going to have to pretend for now that we're fine and we'll be okay. And to begin with, muddled we muddled through that first week after the reveal. And it was a very confusing time. It was like one minute we were more in love than we'd ever been, and the next minute we were sitting having the most horrific conversations, both sobbing, both just deep in this trauma that we were both experiencing. And after about, I think it was about a week, I can't remember, if I'm really honest with you, it's very blurry. It got to a point where we realized we really couldn't be under the same roof anymore. We needed to just separate for a period of time to just gather our thoughts, do some healing. We'd started working with a couples therapist, and to see if we could almost, bring this back round without having to tell anyone, which, I mean, it's bless us for thinking that we were going to resolve this in a matter of weeks. This was a huge undertaking. But really, what I wanted to talk to in this episode was the experience of those first few months after the reveal, and how I began to look after myself, and how I really began starting the foundations of the transformation that was going to come from this devastation. And I want to be really clear with you on one thing. If you are right in the middle of this, and perhaps you are 2 years on after the reveal, perhaps you're 10 years on after the reveal and things are starting to bubble to the surface, there is no set timeline on healing post betrayal. There's no particular thing that you should be doing or feeling or healing or be beyond at any time, because I know from so many of the clients that come into my world is that, first of all, we're all on different paths and different times. And second of all, some of us will be more inclined to brush something under the carpet to begin with, and then it come out further down the line for us to really look at it. So don't go thinking that there is something wrong with you, or that you're more broken than the next person because you're not further along in your journey, even if it's been longer after the reveal. It doesn't mean anything. But one of the first things that I know that me and my ex made the mistake of doing, and again, I see this so many with times with my clients too, is the conversations, the constant conversations, endless re-traumatizing conversations about what happened. And that conversation does not actually help anybody. And I know from, again, my own experience and my clients, that because we are the ones that have done something to hurt the other, so we are effectively in the wrong, in inverted commas, we feel this immense guilt, and therefore we almost overshare as a way to try and give our partner everything that they want and that they need to try and take some of this pain away. Like, if I can give you and be as honest as I can, and I give you all of the answers to all of the questions you're asking me, then perhaps this is going to make you trust me again. This is going to make this feel easier. But in the end, what happens is you go down these rabbit holes, and they become more and more difficult, more challenging. You become more activated, more triggered, and neither of you are getting anywhere. Instead, you're getting pulled further and further and further into the trauma. And I even remember our couples therapist saying at one point, just because a kid wants chocolate, you don't just constantly give them chocolate. And it's the same as like these conversations around the really traumatizing parts of the affair or the betrayal, is that just because they want to know all of the details and keep asking you and asking you and asking you, it doesn't mean you should give it to them. Because just like too much chocolate is going to make a child sick, too much information that is not necessary is also going to make the relationship sick and both of you sick. And this is something that I would absolutely recommend having a couples therapist navigate through, because I honestly, without our couples therapist, I don't know whether or not we would be as amicable as we are now. And although we're not friends in any capacity, we don't have any like, hey, how are you conversations. I know that if I was at an event where he was, we would be totally fine. We would say hello, we'd have a hug, hello, and then we would carry on with our evening separately. But there is not bad vibes at all. And it's really important for me to keep that. But above and beyond the amicability, is that a word, of me and my ex now, it was integral to help us navigate through the trauma that we were both experiencing in that moment, and how to create safety within the partnership as we continue to try to heal from this. And at the end of the day, you have two very wounded people trying to resolve something that feels insurmountable. It's not insurmountable, but I remember very clearly feeling like, how the hell are we going to climb this mountain? It felt just impossible. But I tell you that the number of times it felt better having had a couples therapist to support us, to help us through these very sticky parts, when I found out he didn't feel like he loved me anymore, when we were navigating a very difficult situation with a mutual friend, that was really supportive. And so that endless conversation that you're having with your partner, do not have to do that. You do not need to engage in the round and round and round and round and round, because that pain that you're pulling yourselves into, it feels almost like you're picking that scab off the wound over and over again. And I know what it feels like, how satisfying it is to pick a scab off a wound. But I'm telling you now, it's not going to help it heal any quicker. The other thing that I know is easy to think that we should do, which I would definitely say doesn't help, is telling every single person you know and trying to explain yourself to them. From my experience and all of my clients' experiences, I understand that every situation is different, and the way that it's handled between the couple and people in their lives is also completely different. Sometimes I see people handle it more like me and my ex, which was in deep secrecy. I see other situations in which the partner who has been cheated on makes it their mission to really tear down the other party and tell all of their friends, their children, their parents, really trying to make an example of them and really pouring all of their pain out. I see other people who have got really supportive parents or supportive best friends who are able to hold them in that, which is incredible. But the one thing that I would say is, it's not everybody else's business. And I had somebody message me recently saying, I'm not sure how much I should be sharing. Am I avoiding telling the truth, or am I protecting myself? And my answer is, you don't need to tell anyone. The only person that needs to know in this situation is you and your ex-partner, or you and your partner. And if you have some friendships that can hold you in that, then 100% recommend speaking to them. But you do not need to explain yourself to people who don't get it. You don't need to tell people at work. You don't need to tell people, that you meet at the school gates. People generally aren't going to get this. And everybody comes with a very strong opinion on betrayal. We're almost programmed it from childhood. There's religious conditioning, societal conditioning, familial conditioning, our own experience of betrayal in our lives. And what happens is people become very hard on their views around it. And even if you were to explain or have some kind of excuse, no one is going to be able to hear it. So finding the right people, but you do not need to explain yourself to people who don't get it. The other thing that feels like it should help, but it really doesn't, is spiraling in the guilt and the shame loop over and over again and allowing your mind to run riot in the I'm a terrible person, what have I done, how could I do this, I deserve to never be loved, I deserve to lose everything, how can I make this better, I can't believe I've destroyed my whole life. We kind of get stuck in this like vortex of shame and guilt, and there's a part of us that I think believes that it's going to help us heal or it's going to help us move forward, but instead it's keeping you stuck in a really low vibrational state, and it doesn't actually help, even though it feels like it does. And I'll know how difficult it is to break free of it. My God, do I know that? Especially when you have, text messages from your ex at 2 o'clock in the morning asking you another very personal question about what happened. It's very hard to detach from the stories in your mind about being a terrible person, about how guilty you feel, how you are just the worst person in the world. But looping in it and staying stuck in it is not helping you at all. And nor is Googling, am I a terrible person at 2 o'clock in the morning? Also doesn't help, because so much of Google is not going to give you what you're looking for. It's not going to really give you compassion. It's not going to give you a cuddle. It's not going to say, I'm sorry that you're going through this. It's so hard for both sides. It's going to often talk about the person that's been betrayed. It's going to talk about their experience, or it's going to talk about people having been 2 years on and healing after their marriages ended, which, is helpful, but it's not what you need in that time. And Google, even though it feels like it's got all the answers, does not. Oh, and I would also say ChatGPT. I mean, I love ChatGPT, but just allowing yourself to go down these wormholes of shame and guilt, it's really feeding what Eckhart Tolle calls our pain body. And the pain body is something that we all carry, and it's almost a very familiar frequency of pain that we all have our own version of. And we unconsciously find ourselves putting on this kind of the pain jacket, the jacket that's like covered in barbed wire, that we just put on and just bury ourselves in the pain, because even though it is so uncomfortable, it's also really familiar. And so if you're finding yourself in those shame loops and those guilt loops, I'd love you to just, even if you could just step aside for one moment and perhaps register how familiar this pain is, even though it feels much more acute right now, and the stories in your mind are probably even louder, but how familiar is this essence? Where in your life, or how long in your life, have you been feeling a similar way? Have you always hated yourself? Have you always shamed yourself? Have you always wished that you were better or more or something different? Because these stories that you keep finding yourself in, they're not new. In fact, they're going to be fully imprinted on your nervous system since you were a child. It's just right now, it's unavoidable because the pain is so close to the surface. The other thing that I would definitely not recommend doing, which I kind of did a little bit, which was self-isolate. And, I look back at not having told some of my closest friends, and I think there is an element of regret in that. because ultimately I felt so alone. Would I have told all of them? No. But there was maybe one or two that I would have shared with who I think could have held me in it, even though it was terrifying. But I kind of isolated a little bit, and that didn't help me because in the isolation, I felt like no one was really there for me. There was like one or two friends that were really there for me, but majority were not. And I think that's because I unconsciously hid away and I didn't really want to see anyone. I was obviously in this very deep healing process as well already. So I just kind of went into a little hole into my healing cave, which definitely helped, but at the same time separated me quite a lot from my friends and actually probably didn't help in the demise of me and my friendships. So, but these are all the things that I would say didn't help or don't help, even though we think they should. But I also want to talk about the things that helped me stay sane in this really horrific time, because it honestly felt like I was never going to survive, but I did. And I am sitting here today, and as I said, I will remind you again, it is 5.5 years since I revealed to my ex-husband, and I feel better than I ever have done in my life. And I'm not just saying that, I am telling you that this implosion in my life was so necessary. And I wish I hadn't caused the pain to my ex-husband, and I wish I hadn't caused the pain to myself. But I know that I needed a big, big shake to wake up from the ways in which I was not living my truth. I was not living as Alex. I was living at this version, this mask of who I thought I had to be. And it was cold and it was distant and it was hard to get to. And I love that version of me. I love that version of me for everything that she went through in order so that this version of me could be here today. So I don't hate her. I don't think she did anything wrong. I think she just didn't know how to process what she was going through, and she didn't know how to ask for help. She didn't know how to process the grief of the IVF. She didn't know how to deal with the loneliness in her marriage. And it makes me equally furious as it does laugh out loud when people comment and they tell me that I haven't taken accountability, or they tell me that I don't even know, let's not even get into, I don't want to give it too much energy, but they have no idea. They have no idea. This idea of just, you should have just talked to your husband rather than done that. Like, cool, dude. Yes, I agree. I really a million times wish that I had had the confidence or the nous or the ability to feel like I could have that conversation with my husband, or even, if I'm honest with you, the self awareness to know that I was really fucking unhappy. But I didn't know. I didn't know because I was so disconnected from myself and my feelings that I didn't know how unhappy I was. And also, another thing, which also really gets on my wick, just one more thing before I continue, is this idea that we all just have the ability to speak what's on our minds. And most of us don't, because most of us got taught as children that it's better to be seen and not heard, and that we created entire personalities to please other people because we grew up in households that perhaps there was volatility or anger or abuse even, and we learned to stay quiet. Like, I'm not going to speak up and I'm not going to tell you that there is something really wrong with me or wrong with the marriage, because I am terrified of the consequences of that. I need to just keep stum and get on with it. So all of that nonsense, if any of you have been reading those comments, just ignore it. Just know that you're in your own form of hell right now as it is, and all of the punishment that you're giving yourself, there is nothing that anybody that can say on the internet that probably is going to be worse than what you're saying to yourself. So just don't read them. But what I really want to talk about, I've gone off on a tangent, but what I really want to talk about is what actually helped me stay sane in the midst of all of that pain I was in, and all of that ungroundedness and fragility and unknown future, and the pain of both of us. And one of the main things I would say, and I would encourage you to do this beyond just a couples therapist, is to get support yourself. And I would say a therapist is a great place to start. I had a therapist, I had a coach, I had a breathwork facilitator, I had an acupuncturist, I had, what else did I have right at that beginning part? Well, actually, oh, and the couples therapist. And therapy is definite place to start when you are in that experience of everything just collapsed. I would also say eating food. Because I remember existing off mainly crisps for probably the first few weeks. I could barely eat, if I'm honest with you. I'm gnawly hungry, whatever the weather, whatever the experience, however stressed I am. But at that time, I felt like I didn't even deserve to eat. I couldn't bring myself to actually cook myself a meal, but I would say that is one of the most important things to do, is keep feeding yourself and nourish yourself. Don't just eat toast and crisps or biscuits. The next thing I would say, which was an absolute non-negotiable for me at this time, was getting out into nature every single day. I would go for a walk. I lived near Wanstead Flats in East London, and it felt like I was in the countryside, even though we were in the middle of London. And I would take myself on this hour to 90-minute long walks every single day to get out of the house, even though it's absolutely freezing. I started to really connect to the seasons. I found it very helpful to keep reminding myself that in autumn, when all the leaves fall off the trees, and in the winter, when so much of nature does look like it's died, or does die, that it will always rebirth in spring. And it's just a miracle to me, the way that nature is not afraid to let it all go and to just surrender to the process. You don't see trees gripping on to the leaves thinking, oh my gosh, well, what if this is the best leaf I've ever had? Or what if this leaf doesn't grow again? The trees are just like, sure, just let them all go. And then all of those leaves turn into mush and turn into mud and go back into the earth. And it's this cyclical process of that energy that gets fallen from the trees, comes back into the earth, dissolves, turns back into the earth, and then it begins to grow again in spring. And then we have the full bloom in summer. And this is what just happens. And this is an excellent metaphor for life. Yeah, it was an incredibly healing experience and completely transformed my relationship to nature. I'm actually so grateful for how nature held me in that time. So, yes, please go outside and get into nature. I also found that I needed to have friendships. I needed to have conversations that felt like I was being soothed. And one thing I realized in this process, and this was a really hard realization, some of you may be familiar with it, some of you may not, was that I was someone before this moment that was so together, was so unemotional, never needed anybody, didn't cry in front of my friends. I can't really remember crying in front of my friends really ever. I wasn't somebody that needed support. But at this time in my life, suddenly I was working on myself. I'd been working on myself with my coach for like a year. And obviously I'd started with my therapist, 2 years after that. And I was starting to feel, I couldn't help but feel, this was so painful, this experience of going through the reveal, that there was no choice except feeling my feelings. And the friends that I knew from the time that I wasn't feeling my feelings didn't know what to do with this version of me. And there were some that were amazing, and I will forever be grateful for how they held me in that time. And then there were others, which I'll be honest with you, that was the beginning of the end of our friendship. But one thing that I needed more than anything in that time was friendships that were going to hold me and that would soothe me. And I remember, I was starting to run out of friends. I was like, what do I do? And I remember my mentor saying to me at the time, or my coach saying to me at the time, Alex, you need to find a friend who understands what you're going through, i.e., I was going through this deep transformational work. So who are you gonna reach out to? And there was one girl that I remember I had met at the first retreat I'd ever done, and we'd also been in a group program together that we'd been doing online. And I thought, Ash, I'm gonna reach out to Ash. And I remember messaging Ash, and I just basically asked her if she'd be my friend. And we still laugh about that now. And she was so grateful that I had reached out to her. And she was incredible in that time. She really was. And I was able to have these conversations with her, and she would just hold me and make me feel like I wasn't a bad person. And I really appreciated all of her heart, basically. So, really finding your tribe, finding people that can soothe and can hold you in this without their own judgments is really important. It was super healing for me to meet girls that could almost hold me in this newer version of me where I was suddenly more emotional and was more vulnerable. So that really helped. And also taking my time. Taking my time is one of the things that, again, I actually wish I could go back to the version of me that was trying to just hurry up and fix myself. But now I know how long it takes, and this isn't to scare you into, oh, it's going to take ages for you to heal. I don't mean that. I mean just trust the process. Trust the process, that if you are showing up, if you are doing the work, if you are trying to work with a therapist or with somebody to support you to understand the root of this so that you don't do it again, then just trust that the rest of life is going to start unfolding in exactly the way that it needs to. And I at one point remember that I called them myself, I called them my army. I had an entire army of women to support me in this. And I was somebody that always thought I had to do something on my own. And I really didn't. I actually couldn't get through this. And I had so many people on my side, different kinds of healers, different kinds of therapists, different kinds of coaches. I just knew that I was going to get through this, but I wasn't going to get through it on my own. So that is one of the most important things. And, I know what it feels like, as I have heard also from many of my clients, to feel like you don't deserve to feel good, or you don't deserve to feel better. You should still be punishing yourself. You should still be suffering. But you are allowed to take care of yourself. You are allowed to have boundaries about conversations that you don't want to have. You are allowed to set boundaries with family members, with your friends, with your partner. Even if you were the one that cheated, you get to rebuild not only yourself, but also your relationship from a place of softness. You don't need to do it from a place of self-punishment. Because honestly, if you continue to try and heal from a place of self-punishment, you will live the rest of your life as the one that did the bad thing and constantly feeling like you need to make up with it, that you need to make up for it. And that will just lead you to more and more and more self-abandonment. So really, this is about being able to love and accept yourself just as you are, even if you've done something that seems so painful, and it is so painful. And I know that's probably easier said than done. And I'm sure if somebody had said, Alex, you just need to accept yourself when I was in the middle of it, I'd have been like, are you joking? There is no way. But on the same breath, I really believe that the best thing to do is to start really understanding where you were when you made this decision. And I don't mean physically, I mean emotionally. Where were you? And get really honest with yourself. What was really truly going on in my life when I made this decision that doesn't seem in alignment with my morals? Because I can almost guarantee you that decision to act out in this way was not made when you were in a really happy, grounded place. And so even if you can find 0.5% of compassion for that version of you, it doesn't mean that we get to forget what we did. It doesn't mean that we get to bypass it. It doesn't mean that we now don't have to take self-responsibility and to heal whatever it was that made us act in that way. But even 0.5% compassion for the version of you that acted in that way will begin to help you heal. That is for sure. And the one thing that I really want to leave you with is that even though it feels so dark right now, even though it feels like, am I ever going to reach a point of self-forgiveness? Is my life ever going to feel light again? I can promise you that it's not forever. Even if it feels like it, there is absolutely a light at the end of this tunnel, and this too shall pass. This too shall pass. But the way through isn't force. The way through is through tenderness and slowly but surely beginning to learn how to love and accept yourself just as you are. And if and when you are ready to begin that journey home, I am really excited to say that I have a brand new offering called The Sanctuary, which is going to start in January 2026. This isn't about deep excavation into the past. This is about helping you center yourself and learn how to love yourself in the present. So I'm going to put a link to join my mailing list. They'll be in the show notes. Join my mailing list and you'll be the first person to know when it's time to apply for the sanctuary. So I'm really looking forward to meeting some of you in there. And for now, I'm sending you so much love. Thank you for listening to the Deeper Love podcast. If today's episode spoke to you, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you're ready to go deeper, you'll find all the ways to work with me in the show notes. Until next time.